Covalence friends, Andrew here. I'm going to be working on a little calendar app series. I don't know the exact final destination we're taking this towards, but I do know some intermediate steps I'd like to take with this. So I'll have the resources linked alongside everything in the description, and if you'd like to follow along with the video series, please come and join me. Now that we have our low-budget Vsauce intro out the way, let's go ahead and talk about the project details. I'm going to be basing this app based off of our brand new boilerplate, so this is still kind of the same fundamental app structure. It is a full-stack TypeScript application, with the biggest change being we're utilizing ES-Build for our bundler. So Webpack, just too slow. It was time to kick it to the curb. ES-Build is just stupid fast comparatively speaking, so we have a few videos. Luke created a series on how to build your own boilerplate, building this from the ground up, so you should go check those out. I'll have those linked in the description. The app I'm going to make for this video, I too will also have a repo linked in the description, but yes, so that is kind of the architecture. What I want for this app is I want to be able to save calendar events and then like email and text myself reminders. That's really all I want. So is that something that like Google Calendar already does? You know, kinda, I guess. You can integrate like maybe some third-party service and intercept like an email notification, and like, you know, it's probably possible, but I like doing stuff my own way sometimes. So we'll make our own custom app here and we can configure it exactly how we like. So like I said, don't exactly know where exactly we'll end up, but sometimes these projects are about the journey and not nearly as much as the destination. So let's go ahead and get started with a clone of this boilerplate, and I'll go ahead and fire up Beekeeper or open it up, and it's going to be a Postgres backed database. So let's go ahead and get this rolling. Pop into my source code directory. I'll clone this project down, and we're going to call this Scheduly noted. Not exactly the most, original idea, because I was working with some of our students, our Catalyst students, on a calendar-based app. We're kind of working on that in conjunction with me filming these videos. So that's the idea that we had for the name for that project. So I'm just co-opting it for this. So it's a little more like, production ready, but whatever. So cd, Scheduly noted. Now, if you're cloning from our boilerplate, you don't have write permissions to it, but I do, and I have overwritten our own boilerplate plenty of times before. I don't really need to like blow out the entire Git repo. I could just change the remote URL, but this is going to be a new project. I typically will like, starting from scratch. So we'll go ahead and run git init after deleting the Git directory, reinitialize it as a Git project. And we'll go ahead and add all the files that, we start with. So we'll just have one initial commit that we squash everything to, plus we remove the remote URLs kind of all at once. So and probably the world's most common commit message, initialized project. All right. Well, we've got the project at least started and cloned. I'm going to go over here and make a new database. All right. Very creative and inspired, I know, calendar. So we'll go ahead and create that with Beekeeper Studio, which, by the way, if you haven't utilized Beekeeper Studio before, love them. They're great. I just love that they support multiple database engines. So I do a lot of Postgres and MySQL work, and it's really convenient to be using the same app to jump between the two. So all right, we're going to create a users table. I'm going to have some IDs that are going to be serial. And if you're not familiar with Postgres and you are with like MySQL or some other database engine, serial is just the data type for an auto incrementing integer. So the ID is completely managed for us. Name. It could be a full name. We'll go with 64, something like that. Email. We'll let it be 128 characters, not null, and also unique. Definitely something you should add on as a clause if you're using, that for authentication, which we will be. We'll also add in a username. We'll give our users the flexibility of choosing their own username, and we can set it up so that our login route can use a regular expression to, parse that and determine if they're logging in via email or username. So I always like when sites have that flexibility. So if I see a feature on a website I like, I tend to want to, co-opt it and add it into some of my apps. And yeah, we'll force our users to create a username, and that too, should be unique. I'll also specify name as not null. Password, we're going to be using bcrypt, so it'll be a fixed string of 60 characters. I'll specify not null here anyway, but that's not something getting derived from user input, so we should always have that. We are going to be deriving, the password, the plaintext one, from user input, but we will be the ones creating the one that actually gets stored in the database. Let's see. Email verification, let's see. We'll set up an email verified column. I don't really use Postgres nearly as much, so I'm not sure what the community prefers for like booleans. Coming from the MySQL background, I tend to use tinyint just because that's what boolean is an alias for, 0 and 1, with the tinyint, storing it. Not sure what the Postgres community, prefers, but hey, I'll go kind of out of my comfort zone here and use boolean, trying something new for once. So we'll have email verified. We talked about having a phone number as well, so varchar. Like, depending on the country code, we'll just go with like 16 to be safe. And we'll just enforce like registration with every bit of data. So we'll make the phone number mandatory. We'll have phone verified as another Boolean column. So we'll make our users, click a link or enter a code from their phone to verify their account. So we'll ultimately have something like that set up. But for now, I think this is all right for now. So we'll go ahead and create that user table. Let's see, got a trailing comma here. There we go. All right, for the calendar events table, we will also have an ID that's going to be auto incrementing that serial data type. Now, this app is going to be like a personal calendar per person. It's not going to be like a shared calendar. So no many-to-many relationship, just one-to-many, we'll have events, keyed to a user ID, but that's really it. We don't have too crazy of a database structure here. So let's go ahead and get that coded out, however. Let's see, and I need to get started with better conventions here. There we go. I'm going to Pascal case everything, snake case everything. See, user ID is going to be an int. All right, we've got that taken care of. We want a description of the event itself, maybe a name. We'll have both of those. Why not? Yeah, because like this would be like the title of your event. Make it a little bit longer. And these, I guess these could be nullable. Maybe not name. Yeah. Description, we'll let this be a larger field. This one we could let be nullable. You don't have to fill out a description for like dentist visit or like doctor's visit, you know. No huge need for that. All right. Now, the way I'm planning on storing these, so dealing with date times, you know, sucks, but the way I'm planning on utilizing these dates, these date times, is I'm gonna have a library like React Calendar or React Date Pick or something like that. I'm gonna let that choose the time, so it's gonna be, you know, storing the user's like locale time. We're gonna store that as just a string in the database. Why as a string? Because we're not really doing any alteration on it, so we'll store it just as a string. And how is it going to get, you know, pulled back and utilized? Well, it gets fed back into the React calendar, so it's just taking its input, piping it directly to its output. So it's for that reason that the timestamp itself, I'm just going to let be a simple string. So event.time, event.date, event.datetime. I mean, I could let it be a datetime for like sorting purposes, but the thing is like for this, we're not really like aggregating a bunch of data from different accounts. It's just all this info is going to be like sequestered to a user account at a time. So like there's not really a whole, like I can't really justify, I think in this use case, storing it as a datetime. Yeah, okay. And it's probably going to be coming back as like an ISO 8601 formatted string, so we'll give it like 32 characters. We definitely do not want this field to be null because that's kind of the primary, you know, thing behind the calendar event. So it can be pretty simple. ID linked to a user. It's got a name, potentially description, and then the event datetime itself. We could also maybe argue for a location field. We definitely will let that be nullable. That's not something you have to fill out for everyone. I could see people potentially putting in like a Google Maps link for this, which those can be pretty huge. I'd say 256, but I feel like that might still be too conservative, so we'll go with 512 characters. Okay, you know what? It's good enough for me. I've talked myself into that. So we'll do the server-side development first. That's typically, you know, my approach. I like to get my infrastructure set up first, and then I can worry about UI once everything's working. So we'll start with our server-side code first. I'm going to create some interfaces describing my user object and my event object. So let me drag this over here. You can't see it at the moment, but I can. And that lets me see VS Code in its entirety. So create a user face describing my user. ID, it's going to be a number, name, string, email, string, username, string, strings for days. All right. Password, string, email verified, Boolean, phone we're storing as a string. You know, we're not doing math with it, so it's not going to be stored as a number. Plus, we might have to store like, I'll probably be using like Twilio as my phone library if we do decide to start doing like text messages with this app. So I think they do require like the plus symbol and the country code. So like with the plus symbol being integrated in there, we probably do want to store it as such just for easier recall. All right, ID name, email, username, password, email verified, phone verified. Cool. That's that. Scrolling down, let's go ahead and create our interface for events, or event singular. ID, that's going to be a number. User ID, we could type this as a number, but one thing that I always like doing, and this is completely like neurotic behavior, nobody else that I know of does this. I don't see it in anybody else's source code, but whenever I am working on something with a relational database, I do like to kind of demonstrate that relational link in my interfaces if I can. Plus, it's a great single source of truth. Like, if I set this up as a number, and then if I decide to switch over to using like UUIDs, I might come in here and say, okay, let me find, you know, ID number, replace, let's see, full match. So if I change like the user ID to a string and then the event ID to a string, you know, might be fine and dandy, but there's something I left out. I overlooked this. And for an app this small, you probably won't overlook something like that, but it would be really annoying for your event object to still continue to refer to your user ID property as a number when that's, you know, not what it is. So I like creating single sources of truth by using referential properties with TypeScript. So we'll refer to the user interface ID property for my event user ID property. Now this derives that as a string. If I were to keep this a number, as I, you know, actually have stored in my database, user ID down here now derives that and is typed as a number. So I like that because it's a tiny bit more setup at the very beginning, but it's kind of, I feel, the TypeScript way, you know, creating that single source of truth methodology where everything just kind of derives its types downstream. So completely, you know, neurotic behavior. Like I said, I don't see anybody else doing this, but it's something that I do like to do. Let's see, we have name, location, description, date time. Location we'll mark as an optional property. Description 2 will be a string. And then the date underscore time is, I think that's what I named it. Yeah. All right. So small structure, but hey, we're getting started. Now I'm going to go ahead and start installing the Postgres library .env, and let's see if we can get our database code connected. So npm I pg. I, for the life of me, don't remember if they have TypeScript installed or not. So I'll just wait to install its types and see if it yells at me. And if it yells at me, I was right the first time. And if it doesn't, well, great, because we then have types for our Postgres library. So fantastic. Excellent, excellent. Cool. All right. So with .env in here, I'm going to create an env file to manage my credentials. So you want to create a database user property here, whose value is, I'm just using my root account right now locally, so all right, so my local user password, host localhost, db name, or I'll call it db database, That's going to be calendar. Let's double check. Yep, cool. All right, we've got our env. Let's set up a configuration directory. So config index. I have like a little foam shroud around my microphone, which I think helps with reverb, but it's also really annoying when I'm trying to look at anything to the left of like this on my screen, because I have to like crane my neck over. And so if you guys see me doing that throughout the video series, it's because of my dumb little foam shroud, which honestly, I don't even know if it helps, but all right, we'll get our environment variables injected into memory. We'll get our Postgres config object set up. So user is going to be process.env. I trust literally nobody worse than myself to type out environment variable properties and values. So I would sooner do something like Twitch plays Pokemon, but like live unfettered access to my keyboard, than try to like blindly hope on a production app I've got my right environment variables without, directly copy and pasting them, because I have been burned way too many times by myself. And you name these pretty consistently, but that does mean that, from time to time you get a little forgetful. You call this like db pass. So all of a sudden your password's undefined and you can't connect, and you freak out and cry because, you spend a half hour debugging, why can't I connect to my database? All right. We'll have a lot more environment variables we'll be sticking in here. So we're going to be actually sending out emails. So we will be utilizing Mailgun. I think we will utilize Twilio, so we probably will do some texting stuff. We have some authentication stuff we'll be putting in here, so we'll get some good use out of our env. All right, now that we've got our configuration directory taken care of, let's create our database folder. There we go. All right. So we'll go ahead and import the Postgres library. We'll import my config directory. We'll create a pool of connections. New pg.pool. We'll pass in our config object. Boom, boom. And then we're going to write a wrapper function around the Postgres query function, just to make it nice and dynamic and reusable. So this function will pass in a generic to, we will pass in a SQL string, and we will also optionally pass in a values array of untrusted values for the Postgres library to undergo its sanitization. We don't want to end up like little Bobby tables and get SQL injected, so yeah. And the reason why I don't mark values as optional, but instead make it a mandatory property, but with a default argument, is because some database libraries don't accept an undefined value. They won't, assign an empty array in the event it's undefined. So you don't have to do this for most, but I want to say the MySQL 2 library complains about that, and I think the Postgres library complains about that. Not the PG library, but Postgres in its entirety. MySQL and PG, those two libraries are cool about passing in undefined, so you can actually make an optional thing, but like I said, it's kind of just annoying and a headache, and this is going to be compatible across like all of the libraries, so just give it a default value and it makes your life a whole lot easier. All right. And we are going to return a promise resolving in data of the type T, whatever, generic we pass in. The promise is going to resolve with that type of data. So we can type our query functions ahead of time. We'll execute pool.query, passing in our SQL, our values, and then taking the error callback, result callback that we get, and handling this appropriately. If we have an error, we will reject the promise. Else, we will resolve the promise. Now, resolve with result. And I want to say results, plural, not result. Now, the way this library is typed, I tend to prefer like coercing its types to like I prefer not having inferred stuff. I like everything just kind of very explicitly typed. So I'm actually going to coerce the type to whatever generic I pass in. And we can get a little more granular with this. So with a lot of other, database libraries, if you're running a select statement, for example, you're going to have your, library potentially resolve with just the data. I tend to prefer that structure. So we could just leave it here, but I like being a little more opinionated versus like whatever the default, flow is of things. So one thing we can do is we can evaluate the results object command property. So the PG library returns the meta info. We could look at the query result object and that would tell us, what's exactly in there. But the command property lets us know what was run, what, SQL command was executed. Select, insert, update, delete. So we can evaluate our code return type based upon what that is. So if it was a select, we're not going to resolve all of results as is. So the structure of this, library return type is it's going to have all of your metadata plus a rows property with the data if you ran a select. I just don't want that metadata for, a select per se. I just kind of want the raw, array of data. So here we are going to return just the results.rows. That's it for the select. And for everything else, we can resolve everything as is. Now, like I said, I like having everything explicitly typed, but that doesn't mean I like making a lot of work for myself. So if we are only kind of making a dynamic return type for the select itself, so like here, my generic, I would call the query function and give it like an array of events or an array of users. That's great and dandy, but I don't want to have to type out, the Postgres return type every single time. Like, I don't want to use pg.queryResult every single time I use this query function. So just kind of like our values array, we can go ahead and give our generic a default value. So if I give a generic to the query function, it's because I'm running a select statement and I want to say it's like an array of data. Otherwise, we can say the flexibility is great, but most of the time I'm not running a select. So we can say just default to the Postgres query result, interface. So that is just our, let's see, where is it? Let's see, Postgres query result. Yeah, query result. Okay, so why do they have it typed as like a dynamic key? Oh, sorry. It's also extending. Well, hold on. Where is it extending query result base? Like this, that. Oh, I just literally didn't look further enough to the right. Like, you can actually see the extends keyword here. I'm like, wait a sec. I was like, no, 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 no. Yeah. So query result is going to be the interface describing all that metadata. And this lets us keep it, untyped pretty much most of the time. I'm actually going to rename this to connection.ts. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can daisy chain up my imports on my index, just kind of keep that nice and clean, keeping, some separation. I don't want to have like daisy chain imports and exports alongside my, query function, like my connector, just keeping kind of cleaner responsibilities. All right. So let's go ahead. I'll create a folder just for my queries. I'm going to have a file for basically every one of my tables in my database. So we have users.ts. And then, sorry, the foam thing, like when I get like lower than halfway down the screen, I have to like instead crane my head at an angle. I'll say events.ts. Cool. All right. We'll import query in here from our connection in our database folder, which is where we currently are. This is just at the top level of it. We'll import our user type. All right. And we'll go ahead and start writing some functions. Query, select all from users. That's it. Now that generic that I was talking about, right now the promise is going to automatically type itself as the query result meta info, which I don't want in this instance. I actually am running a select. And we modified it saying if a select statement was run, return just the rows. So it's not that meta info, it is actually just purely the array of data. So the type of all now is going to be a promise that resolves with an array of user objects, and that's it. So we've gotten really kind of customized with that little connection that we created, and it's just kind of nice and clean. Let's see. I'll create a type here for like queryable, like usable columns to query the users table to find one specific user. So I'll say type columns. We'll go with that. We'll allow someone to search our user table by ID or by email or by username. So this is just going to let us create a dynamic query. Instead of having to create 3 queries to look up a user by ID, by email, or by username, we instead are going to have that as a variable, and we will allow a dynamic, column. So and I named this function by because I said the word by, but I'll call it find by. We'll pass in the column and we pass in the value, which with email and username would be a string. With ID, it would be a number. So here we'll say value will be either a string or a number. And here is where we actually get to use those. Column, comma, value. I might not have typed that. Hold on. Column, singular. Query. Let's go look back at the query function. Let's see, SQL string values. Oh yeah, no. I'm going to type the values array as unknown just because I don't know what kind of data I'm going to be putting in here. Chances are we could get away with just typing it as like string or number or Boolean, and that would take care of a lot of our use cases, but we'll type it as unknown for now. I don't want to do any because you're basically just saying like, I don't need you TypeScript. But unknown array at least lets it know it's an array data type. So, all right. And now we have our dynamic, search here. So we can find a user by ID, email, or username. What did I do? I think how did I do that? How did I drag the client and server folders just by themselves out into a new VS Code instance when like my file explorer was most certainly not focused on client and was probably just on like, I don't know, weird. All right. Now, the thing that's nice about like the MySQL and MySQL 2 library is that you can actually provide it an object as your argument for like one of your placeholders, and they will actually split up your key value pairs and parameterize everything for you. The PG library does not quite do that, unfortunately. So if you have a large object, you either have to write your own code to set up the placeholders dynamically yourself, but still send your values to the library itself so they can parameterize it safely. You're just setting up the placeholders. Or you can just enumerate out each property individually, which, just kind of depends on your use case. But let's see here, we'll go ahead and we'll just, since these are small tables, we'll just do it individually. So ID, 3, 6, 7. That's actually like 7 properties I have to pass in. The nice part about this is with me, a few of these are default values or otherwise handled by the database, and everything else is not null. The nice part about the MySQL library is if you leave, if you just like directly dumped data to your database, which you should never do without validating it, if you had undefined data in that object, it just wouldn't serialize that. So you could have one function that would take, any number of properties. So if a user wanted to update their, name, email, username, but not like password or phone, or if they wanted to update, just their email or their username and phone, any kind of combination, wouldn't exactly matter because your update statement would, only update the defined properties. With Postgres, we would have to either just force everything to be updated at once and make sure we just pass along all that data, or you could write separate queries for like every possible outcome, which is not great. But in this instance, we actually have everything being required for creation, so that's fantastic because, I know what should be in there and what is going to be in there. So we need name, email, username, password, and phone. So what we can do is we can actually just destructure those out. Name, email, username, password, phone. Insert into users. Now I can just copy paste these into our query. Values. Insert into users, name, yep. All right, and then we have our placeholders. All right. Now that we've got all of our placeholders defined, we can go ahead and start shoving these variables in, which conveniently enough, we can just take everything in the insertion order. So let's see. All right. Now we actually don't need an all function. We don't need to retrieve all users. We just need a find for authentication's sake for logging in, and we need to create. So I can actually get rid of that as well. Let's see. But I think we will leave it off at this point. We will next, in the next video of this series, go ahead and create the remainder of our queries and get started with authentication itself. So, first video of the series, always kind of like, because, you know, it's a lot of just initial database setup and database work, not the most sexy, you know, code, but I really like it. And I hope you guys are enjoying, you know, the thought of where this is gonna go. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this thus far, go ahead and leave a like and make sure to subscribe if you're not already. And if you want to follow along, go ahead and check the links out in the description, and I will catch y'all in the next installment.